In this recording, I'm going to demonstrate the Doctrine one-to-many self-joining relationship. And the one-to-many self-joining relationship is one where an entity can be referenced by multiple child entities of the same class. So we'll start by creating that entity, and I'm just going to demonstrate this by using a category which will have multiple subcategories, or can have multiple subcategories. Our class is just going to have a couple of properties. They are ID and name, ID being the primary key and name being the category name. Then I'll start working on this relationship. So I'm going to demonstrate both sides of the relationship, i.e. the mapping side and the inverse side. So I'll need children as in child categories and parent as in the parent category. Then what I'm going to do is add the getters and setters, and then I'm just going to remove set ID because that will be done when it's entered into the database. I'm going to add a constructor which I'll use to do a couple of things. First off, I'm going to set this children to an array collection. So as I've said before, by setting it to an array collection, it gives you a lot of handy methods and makes it much more powerful than just using a standard array. And then I'm also going to pass in name as a parameter, which means that a name should always be, must always be given when a new category is created. Looking at the getters and setters and thinking about how this relationship between parent category and child category is going to work, will I ever say set children? It's very unlikely. You got to think about, especially when you have an entity which joins itself, you've got to think about how you're going to use that relationship in real life. Will I set a parent? Yes, that's quite likely. Instead of setting children, I'm more likely to add a child to a categories list of child categories. And so I'll add that method, and that will take a category as a parameter. And so before I actually add this as a child category, I'm just going to do a check and make sure it's not already listed in the collection of child categories. And the way I do that is by calling a contains method. So this is an array collection method, and all it does under the hood, it just checks that this element that I'm trying to add is not already in the collection. So we'll just jump over and take a quick look at that now. And all it's doing under the hood is saying, is this element already in an array? I'll add some documentation, and then I'll think about how, where and when this relationship will be established. In reality, that's going to happen when a new category is created. There and then you're going to want to set the parent, so I'll use that method to create both sides of the relationship by adding it as a child to the parent and by saying parent equals this parent. So with that done, we need to now start turning this into an entity. So using annotations, I tell Doctrine treat this as an entity, and the table name is going to be category. I paste in my primary key stuff there. Name will be of type string, and then we need to start thinking about how we set up this relationship using annotations. Out of the two relationship properties, I'm going to work on this parent property first, because that is the many side of the relationship. So many to one and one to many are exactly the same thing, except the many side is the one that holds a foreign key, so that must always exist. You don't have to have an inverse. And this will be held on a joining column, which we'll call parent ID. And if you think about it, this has to be nullable because there will always be at least one category which can't have a parent. So we could say nullable equals true, but that's the default, so don't actually have to specify that. The reference column name will be ID, so what we're saying there is parent ID on the child category references the ID, which is a primary key, on the parent category. Then we'll look at this children property, so we'll say one parent category to many child categories. So target entity is category and it is mapped by parent. I'll add a couple of comments in here just to remind us which is the owning side and which is the inverse side. So parent is the owning side, and children is the inverse side. And what we'll need to do next is then go over to the terminal and create a migration file. So we do that by running this command here, php bin console doctrine migrations diff. That will create a new version file in the migrations folder, and we'll tidy that up and examine that. So you can see we have a parent ID field which is nullable, and at the bottom there the foreign key parent ID references ID on the same table. And in order to generate that table, we need to go back to the terminal and run this command, doctrine migrations migrate. Are you sure? Yes. Let's check that out in the database. So over to the left, I'll give that a quick refresh. I'm using dbeaver, which has turned out to be a really solid, dependable tool. I really like it. And we'll check out that our fields, we have ID, name and parent ID. It's telling us that that is a key. Let's check out our foreign keys, owner category, reference table, category, and it's a foreign key. Great, so now what we want to do is go over to our Doctrine Relations controller, and we'll create a new method and start to have a play around with this. I'm going to call this method one-to-many self-joining, and it will take the Entity Manager interface as a parameter. I'll borrow some comments and just customize those, so the route is going to be called one-to-many self-joining. I'll start off by creating a parent, so it will be parent equals new category. And if you remember, when we created the category entity, we said you always have to pass a name to the constructor, so that whenever you create a category, it's always automatically given a name. We'll persist that. So Entity Manager persist. Remember, we're not saving anything to the database by calling that. We are just telling the Entity Manager to manage this entity. Now we'll create a child category, and we'll call it child1. And on that child category, we're going to set the parent. So child set parent, and if you remember, this also adds the child category to the parent's list of child categories. Then we need to call Entity Manager persist. And finally, to actually add that to the database, we need to call Entity Manager flush, which will take all the entities under its management. If there's any changes or any new ones added, it will then add those to the database. So we'll paste in some comments which I've taken from above, customize those. Not comments, sorry, just a message to print to the screen. And then we'll go over to the browser, change our route, one-to-many self-joining, parent category record created with an ID of 1, and child category record created with an ID 2. As a little bonus for this recording, I'm going to demonstrate cascade persist. So what will happen here is when we persist the parent, then that persist will cascade to all the children, which will also be persisted without having to explicitly call persist on all of them. If you can imagine, if we had a lot of child categories, that could be quite tedious. So it doesn't happen automatically. We have to go over to the one-to-many mapping in the category entity, and we add this cascade equals curly brackets inside of double quotes persist. And so over to the browser, we'll give it a refresh, and as you can see, it's created another parent and another child category. And so just to prove that I haven't made all that up, I'm going to now remove cascade equals persist, and we'll go back to the browser and run it again. And it gives us a big error because it's saying it's found the relationship, but we're not actually calling persist on the child, and it's given some clues as to how we should resolve this. And I'll just do what it's asking me to do. So I'll go back, reinstate cascade equals persist, run it again, and there you go, it's created another parent category and another child category. Let's check out the database. So select start from category, and so we ran it 3 times successfully, and you can see there are 3 parent categories and 3 child categories. If you haven't already done so, you can subscribe to my channel by copying the visual that you see on the screen, and also hit the little bell if you want to be told when I upload new recordings. I upload every 10 days, and you can find out what's coming up on the About tab in my channel homepage.